In this module on ICT integration, you're going to explore what it means to actually integrate the use of information and communication technologies into education and some of the theoretical basis and processes we use for doing so. So we need to understand the significant changes that are occurring in education. Now, education has always been subject to changes, but the changes are happening faster and faster today. And a large part of your job as a teacher is going to be managing that change, not only for your students, but also for your own teaching and career prospects. Now, within education, we generally see innovations occur in cycles. One of the latest innovations occurring in schools at the moment are iPad devices or tablet devices. Before that, we had laptop devices. Before that, there was the World Wide Web. Before that, there was the introduction of computers themselves. So that's just been around ICTs. But there's always been change in education. Way back in Plato's time, they were decrying the move away from rhetoric and oratory, being able to memorize large sections of text. And then in the times when there was the adoption of the printing press, there was a huge cry that we were going to lose the ability to transcribe documents by hand, and that students would lose that capability. And then we've moved through various other stages of the introduction of radio and of TV, then of projector systems, all of which were seen as huge changes at the time. And we're going through some now, and these will be seen as simply natural occurrences in the next few years. But any new innovation is seen to have a life cycle. There are certain innovators who get hold of new technologies and new ideas and start exploring them very, very early. Then there's the early adopters who see what the innovators are doing and take that on board and adopt that into their practices. So they often attend conferences and see what the innovators are doing and then explore how that can be incorporated into their own teaching. Then we have the early majority who generally are coerced in various ways to adopt the same sort of approaches as the early adopters. And then the late majority, which follow on after those early majorities have sort of come on board. These are the ones that sort of wait until most people are doing it before they do it themselves. And finally, we have the laggards. They're the ones that really struggle to adopt innovations and engage with new ideas and technologies and sort of bring up the rear. So it all happens, and it happens slowly in education, far too slowly for some people. Education and teachers, unfortunately, are one of the slowest to adopt to changes. Technology has taken a long time to be integrated into education, far longer than almost every other industry. Teachers have been protected from that in terms of their job security, where in most other industries they would have been fired long, long ago if they hadn't adopted and made changes as was required by the industry. Things are slowly changing in education. There is a move to really enforce change and get rid of teachers and principals, for that matter, who don't make changes and keep up to date in terms of the improvements to students' students' learning. But there's another metaphor that's sometimes used. This is the pencil metaphor as we know it. And there we have the leaders at the very tip. They try everything out. The sharp ones who find out what the early adopters do and then use what works, and of course discard what didn't work. And there's the wood, which is the early and late majority. And then there's the dead wood, which are the laggards, or in this metaphor, the ones that will never change. And we often have to just wait until they retire or are fired because they're no longer relevant to the education system as it is today. And then in this metaphor, we have the eraser, who work sometimes to undermine what the leaders are doing, and the hanger-ons who pretend they know everything about what's happening but aren't really involved in it themselves. Another process that we keep an eye on is called a hype cycle. This was developed by the Gartner Research Group, and most new technologies go through a series of hype where everyone says it's going to be the latest, best thing, Probably the next big one in this hype cycle would be Google Glass. These glasses that people will wear and they'll see the internet through their glasses. There's a lot of hype about that at the moment. There was certainly a lot of hype around interactive whiteboards. That was hyped up over many years. There's a fair bit of hype at the moment around tablet computers. So generally we see this hype cycle go forward. Everyone has lots of expectations about new technologies, what they're going to do for the classroom. We see the early adopters, they get out there and they find some fantastic ways of using this in the classroom and they make it work. But then we get to what's called the trough of disillusionment. This is where the majority of teachers start using it and start finding out that it's maybe not be exactly as it was advertised. It may not be the greatest thing for education and solve all the problems of education. So we go through a trough of disillusionment, but then slowly we go through this slope of enlightenment where we learn from what the technology can really do and do effectively and what it can't do effectively. And we have more realistic expectations of the technology. And then we progress along that. And most new technologies do seem to follow this hype cycle. Now, another way of staying up to date with new technologies is the Horizon reports. Now, these are produced each year, and there's some links to the websites that you can go to and have a look at. There's some for K-12, there's some for higher education, and they look at what are going to be the next big things in educational technology over the next 1 to 2 years, the next 3 to 4 years, and the next 5 to 6 years. I've been an advisor on those reports for the last 4 or 5 years now, and we're just finishing up the latest higher education one for Australia this week. So, there's some ways of keeping up to date with what could be happening in the future. Actually integrating it into classroom practice is another matter in itself. And we have a range of different processes that can go through integrating new ideas and new technologies into schooling and into education. First off, there can be inaction, where people aren't really interested in doing it and not really concerned about it at all. Then we've got an investigation phase where people are exploring what can be done. We have an application stage where we start regularly using it with students, but we're not really doing it really effectively to change their education yet. We're just including it in their actual what's occurring in the classroom. Then we go through a critical use border and we see true integration where it starts becoming critical to the learning environment. So computers nowadays would be seen as critical to most students' learning. The internet would be seen as critical. It hasn't always been so. And as other technologies come through, they also go through that critical use border. And then finally we start making transformational change. This is where we start doing things that we couldn't have thought possible, and we hadn't even thought could be possible before we had access to the technologies. And the internet's been a big driver of that. There were so many things about the internet that we never thought would be really, really good ideas. No one thought Facebook would be a good idea until it was invented and started using. And there's lots and lots of examples of that in terms of education. So what is ICT? It's a term that stands for Information and Communication Technologies. And we use it to refer to all the uses of technology that can enhance students' learning or the way we teach or just the way we live our lives. Now it's and we call that in the new Australian curriculum, ICT capability. So students develop a capacity to use lots and lots of technologies such as computers, the internet, video cameras, digital recorders, a whole lot of different tools and technologies as part of their general education. So it's not taught in a computing class, it's taught in all of their classes, in any subject area or learning area as they're known. And if they use word processing in English, then that's when they learn about word processing. If they're using spreadsheets in mathematics, then that's where they learn about spreadsheets. If they're creating a video for history, that's where they learn about creating a video. So it's embedded and integrated across the curriculum. And for many years, that was a big focus, and we've been engaging with improving students' ICT capabilities. However, we did lose something in that, and we lost students' ability to engage with an understanding of how the computers and the digital technologies work themselves, how the actual programs work within computers, and various pieces of software and so forth in information systems. And we're going to be returning back to that with a new subject into the Australian curriculum called digital technologies. And every student in years F to 10, which includes every primary year, all the way down to the very beginning, will be learning aspects of computer science, or we call it digital technologies. And that will also include computer programming. And that will go up to year 10. In years 8 to 10, there'll be various subjects, but every school will include those. So it's going to be a major change, and we're going to have some special sessions just when we discuss and engage with that. So I've given you a number of inspirational videos to have a look at about what it means to move to an ICT integrated environment. So have a look at some of those. But let's now have a look at some of the models that we use to learn about ICT integration in depth. The first is the SAMA model. This is Substitution, Augmentation, Modification, Redefinition model. So basically, when we first start out using technology, we substitute what we were doing with doing it very similar, but using technology. So for example, if we were typing a page of text up, we'll now use a computer to word process that page of text. It's not really doing much different. It's just substituting one technology for another technology. What we might find though is with a computer, we can do spell checks on it. So that becomes augmentation. We can now start doing some things that improve what we were doing before. So instead of using whiteout on the typewriter, we can actually just use the backspace and remove the whatever we wrote on the screen. But then we go, and that enhances what we're doing, but then we move to a transformational process whereby we actually modify the way we do things. So teaching typing was not any real different to teaching word processing. But when we say move to desktop publishing, that's completely different. And going to web publishing or blogging or creating online videos or digital text online, that starts becoming very different to typing and word processing. And finally, we can move to redefinition. This is where we start thinking about the whole concept in very different ways. So the idea that we might move to a wiki, whereby instead of just typing, we're adding small sections of text that other students then come along and edit and improve upon, and we all collectively write in a very different way to how we would have first considered writing on a typewriter. And that becomes a whole redefinition of the whole process that's involved with that technology. So as we start learning about how to integrate technology into our teaching, you as a beginning teacher and teachers in schools generally go through those 4 stages. Now it doesn't mean any one particular technology is no good because it's at a particular stage, but it generally means we have to learn how to substitute before we can learn how to augment, and learn how to augment before we can learn how to modify, and learn how to modify before we can learn how to redefine. So there's a video there that you can watch that will take you through that in more detail. That's just the points in a bit more. And some examples of some of the technologies. So substitution technologies would be like using an online dictionary instead of a physical dictionary, using an online calculator instead of a normal calculator, an iBook instead of a book, etc. Then we have some augmentation things, such as doing a Google search instead of using an index card system, drawing on screens instead of drawing on pencil and paper, things of that nature. Then we could move to modification, such as using QR codes or using PowerPoint displays that have a whole lot of animations and transitions as opposed to just using slides. And then we've got other things such as going up to using movies and various other technologies that are listed there that you could have a look at. So that's the SAMA model. Please read into that and have a bit of an understanding of what's involved there. A lot of schools are using that to track how teachers are progressing in terms of their capacity to integrate technologies into their classroom. Then we have the TIMS model. Now this takes the SAMA model and adds various descriptors and examples to the model. So for example, if we pop in and look at, oops, no I can't do it on this page. So for elementary years, if we're doing, say, language arts in a constructive way, open that up and show you what that looks like. So here, each of these has got a little video.
Well, my class is composed of kindergartners and first graders. Well, we have guided reading groups, so I will have a small group of students working with me, and then the rest of the class is out working on various activities. And the goal is to find activities that tie into the lesson that we're doing or tie into some kind of phonics or literacy skills. So today what we were doing was we were having them work on a website that dealt with their literacy, their phonics skills. So what we're trying to do is keep the students engaged. Well, these websites are actually on our school's webpage because our text.
So that's just a simple example. Let me pop back to our page. Whoops. And that would be an entry level or a substitution level, where instead of doing things using worksheets or workbooks, they're using some online activities to do very similar activities. Then you can move through adoption, through adaptation, through infusion to transformation. So if we have a look at one of the transformation examples, here students are creating a PowerPoint about an endangered animal.
These are kindergarten students. In the classroom, we are reviewing endangered animals, and what we do is we go to centers, and the children have made a project with the endangered animals, and we're taking them into the classroom and creating PowerPoints for each of their individual animals. We're also discussing the habitat, environment, weather, vocabulary words, describing what it means, and giving examples of each word. As they work through this, they each do their own taping. They also will go in and edit their film and make sure it's what they need. They will put it into Windows Movie Maker, and they will create their own little vocabulary so it's contextual for them and they can understand what the words mean.
So as you can see, that's a very different process to what we started with, where they were simply using the computer as a replacement to worksheets. Now they're actually using the computer to create their own interactive presentation with their own voiceovers and discussing the vocabulary words. So a very transformative example of the same task as the flashcards or the worksheets being done on the computer. So you can go in and have a look at the various activities that are available there and compare the transformative versus the infusion, back to adaptation, back to adoption, back to the early, which generally follow the same SAMR model. Next model we're going to look at is the TPAC model. Now this is used to work out whether or not it's actually appropriate to use some technology in a particular context. Now what we do here is we have a intersecting series of circles where we have content knowledge, which is what you're going to teach, the knowledge that you're going to teach, pedagogical knowledge, which is your knowledge about how to teach different things. And quite a while ago now, we saw that there was sometimes certain pedagogical approaches weren't appropriate for certain content knowledge areas. So for example, doing discovery learning may not have been particularly appropriate for learning certain pieces of content in mathematics. So there's various different approaches to pedagogy that you'll be learning through your courses, and there's various content knowledge areas that you'll be learning through your courses, and sometimes they match well and sometimes they don't. And overlaying on that is the technologies that we can use. So using a blog in a maths class when we're learning multiplication tables may not be the most appropriate combination. Using a blog in an English classroom when we're using a constructive pedagogy or constructivist pedagogy may be very appropriate. So you can have a look at the various intersections there. And the idea is that when all three combine, then learning is most effective. So the idea is to try to find a good pedagogy, a good way of teaching to match what you want to teach in terms of the content, and then the technology, the educational technology that supports both of those. Because sometimes the technology might support the pedagogy you want to use, but it doesn't really support the content knowledge. Or it might support the content, but doesn't support the pedagogy. I think you get the idea. So read through there and look at the examples. Expectations. Now we have a series of expectations that we have for what students should be able to do at the end of their schooling. But we also have a series of expectations for you as teachers. And the AITS or Graduate ICT Standards are a set of expectations that you will be able to demonstrate as a graduate student coming out of our teacher preparation courses. So you can have a look at those and the graduate ones, and there's a couple of examples of a graduate actually working at the standard that's expected. So give you a quick look at that. So here's the Sharing Our Indigenous Nation standard. Oh, it's a topic, and the graduate is So that's an example of the standard that you are expected to be able to demonstrate at the end of your teacher preparation course. And then teachers can be expected to be working at a proficient level, normally sort of about 2 or 3 years into your career. And then we have highly accomplished and lead teachers which work at higher standards. And hopefully eventually you'll be able to aspire towards those. No good aspiring towards them at the moment. You simply don't have the experience, both in terms of classroom experience or cognitive understanding of the concepts, until you've actually been a teacher for quite a while. So I know many of you are high achievers and you think that you should be able to demonstrate at all the standards at the highest level, but that's simply not possible in various ways at the moment. So you can have a look at those examples and see what the expectations are. Now, up until last year, Queensland had its own set of standards, the ICT Pedagogical Licence that teachers could go through, and you could get an ICT certificate, then a Digital Pedagogy Licence, and then the Digital Pedagogy Licence Advanced. Unfortunately, because of some budget cutbacks, that's been suspended for the moment, but there's some interesting reading there if you want to have a look at what the teachers that you will be going out to on practicum, many of them would have got their licenses and various other levels. Now, some of you will want to go off internationally and teach overseas, and there are various standards for teachers wanting to teach. In this case, in America, they have the ISTE standards, the National Educational Technology Standards for Teachers, and you can see what the expectations are for a teacher wanting to work in the United States. And there's the UNESCO ICT Competency Framework for Teachers for those wanting to work in Europe, and most of Africa also uses that same standard. So have a look at those standards and just sort of see what the expectations are for you as a beginning teacher. Then there's the standards that we have for students. The ICT General Capabilities, which are defined in the Australian curriculum, set forth what it is students should be able to do at various year levels. And of course that also describes what you need to be able to prepare your students to be able to do. There's a bit of an old thing whereby the students can teach the teachers. Well, that's simply not possible anymore. And if you've got a student that is teaching you, then really you need to question what role you play in that classroom. Certainly it's a great learning opportunity for students to take the role of teacher and teach others, and it can be great for the student, but really as a teacher you need to be guiding their learning. Doesn't mean you need to know everything, but certainly you need to know enough to be able to guide students and challenge them and expand what they can do, not relying upon what they can do for your own capability deficiencies. So that's the aspect of what the students need to be able to do in the ICT General Capabilities. And we also have some Queensland Student ICT Expectations. So you need to look at those, and these are particularly important for Education Queensland schools. So these set forth the expectations of what teachers in Education Queensland schools expect to be able to teach their students, and what the students are expected to be able to perform at the various year levels. Then finally, if again you want to go overseas and teach, there's the net standards for students in the United States that you can have a look at. So that's an overview of ICT integration and some of the theoretical processes you can use to support the integration of information and communication technologies into your teaching, both individually and into your schools.